Please join me in welcoming Marc to give our Impulse talk.
Thank you very much, Lindsay and Alan. Thank you for organizing this great conference. Dear ladies and gentlemen, a pleasure to be with all of you here today. So in the next minutes, I would like to share with all of you some reflections and some facts about why and how we should be transitioning towards a nature-first economy, what some of us call a circular bioeconomy, an economy that is powered by nature and prospers in harmony with nature. But let me start first with a few basic ideas. And the first and most important is that nature explains our planet. Nature is what makes our planet special. Nature is the keystone infrastructure that regulates our planetary system, including our climate, the food that we eat, the water that we drink, and the air that we breathe. Nature is the basic fabric supporting all living processes on Earth, including all our economic activities. Even if our economic system does not realize that, because bees, birds, and trees, they do not send bills to us. Also because our economic system derives value from price rather than price from value. The problem is that because our economy has failed to value nature, now we are paying for the cost of its destruction. But nature, as Lindsay mentioned, nature also defines us. We are an integral part of nature, even if most definitions of nature define it against everything that is human or human-made. In fact, we are the result of millions of years of evolution in the most sophisticated laboratory in the planet, our forest. Let me explain you why. Because before trees evolved and forests expanded more than 400 million years ago, our planet, life, the climate was radically different. In fact, the climate was 10 degrees Celsius warmer than it is today, and the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere was almost 10 times what it is today. So not really a habitable planet for a species like ours. But with the expansion of forests, the miracle happened. The destiny of life and our own destiny changed because forests operate following ecologies of scale. They use solar energy at scale to transform CO2 and water into renewable biochemical energy that can be utilized by many other organisms. All that while releasing oxygen and recirculating water in the atmosphere and underground. Still today, in many continents, 50% of the rainfall comes directly from forest evapotranspiration. So what happened? With forest, the planet changed. It was transformed and it became habitable for a species like ours. This explains why our first ancestors evolved 7-8 million years ago inside the forest interacting with trees. We, our physiognomy, our genetics, is the result of all these millions of years of evolution inside the forest. This is why I like to say that this is the planet of the trees, not the planet of the apes. And maybe this also explains why the tree of life is an archetype, a symbol that is repeated across all religions and cultures in the world. You find it in Genesis in the Bible, but also in the Buddhist and the Hindu tradition, in the Amazon cosmology, in the Nordic mythology. Most indigenous cultures worship the tree of life. So, why I'm saying all that? I think it's very important to know where we are coming from now that we are destroying the very system that gave birth to us. And it is also very important to understand the transformative nature of nature, forests, and trees, now that we need to transform our world if we want still this planet to be habitable for a species like us. Because the issue is that we have reached a tipping point in human history. And this tipping point is the result of more than 200 years operating under an extractive economy powered by fossil resources. An economy that is true has resulted in unprecedented economic growth, urbanization, and technological development. But all that development has been at the expense of nature, climate, and our own future. Remember one thing, we have changed the climate of our planet for the first time in human history. And we are crossing its resilience boundaries due to the massive loss of biodiversity, the degradation of our natural and managed ecosystems, and the accumulation of pollutants of different types. The problem when you cross the safe operating space of our planet, like we are doing, is that all these different risks that you see here start accelerating each other. When we are losing our forests, we are not only losing the largest terrestrial carbon sink, one of the main sources for oxygen and water, but we are releasing huge amounts of carbon to the atmosphere that will accelerate climate change and natural disturbances like wildfires, which will in turn destroy more forests and release more carbon. So you enter into a vicious cycle like the one we are in now. Also, when you cross the safe operating the space of the planet, as we are doing today, to make it in very simple terms, what happens is that our environment cannot absorb any longer for the shocks that our economy is generating, which means in turn that our economy is the one that needs to absorb its own shocks. And this is what is already happening today. If you look at the figure on the left, you will see that global insured losses as a result of climate change and nature degradation has doubled in the last 10 years compared to the previous 10 years. Now the new normal of global insured losses due to these catastrophic climate-driven events is above 100 billion per year. This has been consistently the case for the last 5 years. And probably this year is going to be a record because in one event already, the LA wildfires, it is estimated that around $35 billion in insured losses happen. But of course, these insured losses is just one indicator. The overall economic losses are much greater. The natural capital losses are much greater. You all remember the wildfires in Canada in 2023. Alan was mentioning them before. Probably you saw the smoke from here. Wildfires in Canada that year burned almost 20 million hectares of forest. They released the equivalent of 3.5 times the greenhouse emissions of Canada in 1 year, in just a few months. What is the true cost of that? What is clear is all economic sectors, all countries are going now to experience the combined impacts of climate change and nature destruction. Of course, some sectors are going to be more exposed, more sensitive. Those that are, dependent more directly on weather conditions and the state of natural capital. And obviously, our food systems is at the center of this perfect storm. Recent science estimates that food inflation due to climate change will be increasing at a global average of 4% almost every year for the next 10 years. And in fact, we are seeing already food value chain disruptions due to the combined effects of climate change and nature degradation. Last year, probably you all saw how cocoa prices increased by more than 250% because cocoa production in West Africa collapsed due to climate change, natural disturbances, and the degradation of these cocoa landscapes. This year, we are seeing now recently how coffee commodity prices have doubled in the last 12 months. Again, because producing countries like Brazil or Vietnam are experiencing now these compound effects of climate change and nature degradation. But the food systems is not only a victim of the nature and climate crisis, it's also one of the main causes. Remember that the way we produce food, the way we transform and manage our landscapes to produce food is releasing 1/3 of the greenhouse emissions and responsible for 90% of the global deforestation. So it's both a cause and a victim. And I think the same is happening with our cities and our urban environments. And this has been mentioned before. Our cities are both a main cause and a main victim of the nature and climate crisis. The way we build and live in our cities is a main driver for climate change and nature destruction. But the way we build and live in our cities is also exposing urban populations to a much higher risk of climate change and nature destruction. So it is quite clear that we need to rethink our landscapes, rural and urban, and the production and consumption systems connected to them if we want our world to prosper within the planetary boundaries. But to do that, above all, we need to rethink our economy around nature. We need to understand, value, and invest in nature as what it is, the true engine of our economy. And this is not going to be easy because that requires a paradigm shift from an extractive mindset towards a regenerative mindset. It requires moving from an extractive economy powered by fossil resources, an economy that develops at the expense of nature, climate, and our own health, towards a regenerative economy that is powered by nature and prospers in harmony with nature. This is not just nice rhetoric. This is about understanding the laws that govern our planet, like the laws of thermodynamics. Thermodynamics, for instance, explain that when our climate gets 1 degree warmer, and we are beyond that, the atmosphere contains 7% more moisture. This is clear thermodynamics, which means that in dry areas, the atmosphere is going to suck 7% more water, becoming drier. It means that when it drains 7% more water, more floods. So thermodynamics explain why we are seeing more frequent and intense droughts and floods, sometimes in the same region, like in California. So this is thermodynamics. Above that, we need to also understand what we have done in these 200 years, because we have shifted the thermodynamics of the planet. And this is very important that you understand, because in these 200 years, what has happened is that we have moved from an open economic system prior to the industrial era, an open economic system relying on an external source of energy, the sun, reliable, constant, external source of energy, towards a closed economic system powered by finite fossil resources which are internal to the system. What happens when you use fossil resources? You liberate a lot of energy and also entropic byproducts in the form of greenhouse emissions, which are sealing the atmosphere and creating a rather closed system. Now, if you know about the second law of thermodynamics, it is very clear what happened with free energy in a closed system. It results in irreversibility, disorder, and entropy. And this is what is happening today. All this entropy, all this disorder is coming back to us in the form of environmental and economic risks. So there is no other way to get out of this vicious cycle than to go back to an open system. And to do that, nature is our best strategy and reliable partner. Because remember what I told you before about forests. Nature is the interface between us and the sun. Nature translates solar energy into renewable biochemical energy and matter that we can use across our economy if we use the right regenerative approaches. And this is exactly what it is, the nature-first economy, a circular bioeconomy. It's basically an economy that ultimately is powered by the sun. It is an economy that understands, values, and invests in biodiversity and nature-based solutions as the true engine of the economy. It is an economy that creates regenerative landscapes, both rural and urban, and we need to overcome the current dichotomy between the two of them, as basis for circular bioeconomy production and consumption systems that prosper within the planetary boundaries. The good news is that we have the knowledge, we have the technology to build an entire new economy anchored in nature-based solutions as basis for circular bioeconomy products that can replace and environmentally and economically outperform fossil-based products across industries like food, construction, fashion, transport, chemicals, pharma. We obviously have the knowledge to produce food using ecological principles and biological inputs instead of synthetic ones. We can produce coffee and cocoa, coming back to the previous example, using agroforestry systems, where we use trees as the input. And by doing so, we are creating a system that not only produces coffee and cocoa, but is sequestering carbon, supporting biodiversity, and building resilience in the landscape and therefore in the supply chain. So nature is our best insurance. And we obviously have the knowledge and the technology to transform wood, the most versatile material on Earth, a natural battery, to transform it in advanced biomaterials to replace polyester in the fashion industry, carbon fiber or plastics in the car industry through materials like nanocellulose. And as you all know, we can transform wood in wood engineering products, which can help us to transform cities and buildings into carbon storage infrastructures. Now the challenge is we need to bring all these innovations, technologies, and knowledge at a global economy scale. And this is going to be extremely challenging because we are talking about the greatest economic transformation in human history. If you look at the speed that we need to put forward, at the scale, and the mindset shift that this requires, we have never done it in the past, something of this scale. And this is why I believe that cities need to take a leading role, a catalytic role, not only because the way we build and live in our cities have a clear implication in our economy, nature, and climate, but especially, and you know this very well, because cities are the mirrors of society. They are not only the innovation hubs, they are the inspirational hubs. Winston Churchill used to say that we shape our buildings, then they shape us. I think we can extrapolate this idea to the level of cities. We shape our cities, and then they shape our world. They shape our economy. They shape the way we live, the way we consume, the way we think, the way we dream. And this is why cities are so important. We are storytellers. We need our cities to tell a new and different story. And a story about the future, but also about the past of ourselves as a species. They need to tell a story that this is the planet of the trees, not the planet of the apes. They need to explain to the world that forests are the cities of nature, and we need to seek inspiration in our forests to rethink the cities of the 21st century. So to end, a few key messages or concluding remarks. A nature-first economy, which is also a people's first economy, because we are an integral part of nature, is about investing in nature to transform our economy, rather than to offset for its failure. This is very important. We need to move from offsetting tactics to insetting transformative strategies. A nature-first economy is also the best long-term strategy to avoid the unmanageable, but also is the best short-term strategy to manage the unavoidable. Scientists predicted rather well climate change. We underestimated the impacts of climate change. That was too difficult. The scary thing of climate change is not what we know, but what we don't know. But we know one thing, that nature has been delivering solutions in a changing environment for billions of years. So we should be humble enough to take advantage of that. And to finish, I believe that our greatest challenge is not the lack of knowledge, lack of technology, lack of regulations, not even the lack of finance. Our greatest challenge is here, is the collective extractive mindset that has resulted after these 200 years of industrial fossil-based era. And if we want to change our mindset and move towards a regenerative mindset, we need to understand that nature does not belong to us, that we belong to nature. We need to understand that nature is complex, but is not complicated. It follows very simple principles, like the principle of unity in diversity, where biodiversity is the true engine, the ultimate engine of life. It follows the principle of resilience. In nature, efficiency follows resilience, like mitigation follows adaptation, like carbon follows biodiversity. And finally, nature is not outcome-based, it's process-based. And the only permanent process in nature is change, is evolution, because nature is the constant flow of energy from its purest form, light, to its most complex form, which is life. Thank you for your attention.